Another day, another round of repairs on the Mercedes SLK AMG. So today we're going to be doing the oil cooler seals that were leaking in the last video, and we're also going to do a set of rear brake pads. Let's get started. Before I do anything, I always like to put a little bit of stop squeal. This is a product from BG. I'm not sponsored by BG or their products. This is just a product that I've used for quite a while. I apply it to the face of the brake pads before I do the work, and I let it set while I'm getting the wheels off and getting the old brake pads off. And I'll also be putting on some brake parts lubricant around the top and on the edges that don't contact the brake disc, but that do contact the brake caliper. These are all just precautions to help keep brake noise down. And I've got my two oil cooler seals. I've also got the driver door check strap. I'll be doing that off camera since I already showed the procedure for how to replace that. So today we're going to focus on these seals and these brake pads. So on this vehicle, these oil cooler seals aren't too bad. If these hoses are in decent condition, I should just be able to flex the oil cooler away from the oil filter housing and get the seals replaced. It looks like it's going to be 4 T30s to get that oil cooler separated. I am going to need to go ahead and remove my secondary air injection pipes, so I'll go ahead and get this pipe out of the way. Now, one note that I do want to make when I'm doing these oil cooler seals, I like to loosen up the oil filter cap itself and pull it up just enough to let the oil drain back down into the block. It just helps to create a little bit less of a mess when I do remove my oil cooler. And some people will go ahead and remove their serpentine belt entirely, but what I do is I just got a rag down here just to catch whatever may come out of there and keep the belt as dry as I can. Alright, so I've got my oil filter housing separated. There's not much of a gap in here. My hands are just small enough that I could get in there and get the old seals out. So you can see I've got the old seals here. They're definitely closer to plastic than they are to rubber. So I'll go ahead and get these fresh ones in, and we'll go from there. Now keep in mind when you're replacing these seals, it will probably be easier to go ahead and disconnect this top coolant line right here. Depending on how hot your engine is, you will lose a little bit of coolant, but it just makes flexing this out of the way to get access to that lower O-ring quite a bit easier. It gives you a lot more room. So in this case, that was all I needed to do. So I'll go ahead, I'll get my T30s back installed. I've got my new gaskets in there, and we'll go from there. All right, so I've got my oil cooler seals installed. I've got my T30s back in place. I've got my secondary air injection hose installed. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and start it up, let it run for a little bit, make sure I don't have any leaks. And after that, I'm gonna go ahead and get started pulling the rear wheels off so I can do the rear brake pads. But before I do that, I wanna take a minute and thank today's sponsor. Today's video is brought to you by Brunt. Brunt is the brand that's transforming workwear. I needed a pair of boots that would last me day in and day out. I'm constantly on my feet, so I needed something comfortable. These Brunt boots that I got are built of the best materials and technology. I need something that I can count on day in and day out. If it doesn't perform to your standards, you can return your purchase within 30 days for a full refund. Stop paying high prices for boots that won't last. Make sure to use the code MAGICMIKE10. Get $10 off your first purchase with a 30-day risk-free trial. Go to bruntworkwear.com/MagicMike10. That's bruntworkwear.com/MagicMike10. I'll put a link in the description. Now let's get back to work. All right, so I went ahead and I've got my wheel off. I've got my guide pin in here for when I go to reinstall the wheel. Luckily, this is the style of brake pad where all you need to do is punch out these two pins and the brake pads slide out the back of the caliper. There's no need to touch the 16mm bolts that are on the backside of this caliper. Unless you're having a really hard time compressing these pistons, you shouldn't need to do any of that. So I'll go ahead, I'll get these pins knocked out, and we'll get these pads replaced, and I'll show you why I'm doing these rear brake pads. I've got the pins out, I've got the cover plate off of the brake pads as well. I'll go ahead and I'll put a little bit of anti-rust treatment for these guide pins in here. But the reason why I'm doing these rear brake pads is you can see this one's missing a big chunk of material down here. This one's also got a little bit of a divot right here in the center, which I thought was a bit strange. And so looking at the brakes, I see that the rotor's in decent condition. It's a little bit rusty because I haven't driven it recently. But looking at the backside, it still looks okay. but if you look at the bolts for the caliper, they're shiny and new. So what happened on this side of the brakes was I was driving home one day, and all of a sudden I started hearing a really loud screeching noise coming from the rear, and I couldn't figure out what it was, so I pulled over and I found that this brake caliper had actually come completely loose and was just hanging. So what that did was I got very lucky. It didn't jam itself inside the wheel, which is usually what happens, but what had happened is it caused the damage to the brake pads, and luckily didn't do any damage to the disc. So while I was pulled over, I was able to get a ride and go pick up a couple of bolts from the local hardware store. So I was able to get those installed, and I was able to do all this work on the side of the road, and it was good enough to get me back to the shop. So today I'm going ahead and I'm replacing those brake pads that got damaged in that accident, so that way I know I'm safe and I've got good brakes in the rear. All right, I've got my new brake pads installed, a little bit of coating on the pins and on the pads, and everything looks good on this side. So I'll go ahead and put the wheel back on, and I'll probably just time lapse through the other side, and we'll get the car back on the ground. Nothing too complicated today. I am nearing the end of all the work that I want to do on this Mercedes. The last thing that I really want to get taken care of is the exhaust. If you remember in a video a while back, I showed that I had attempted to re-weld one of the catalytic converters, and it's just completely toast. So one way or another, I have to get the catalytic converters replaced. I still haven't decided how I want to do that just yet, whether I want to do a complete exhaust system or just replace the catalytic converters. So let me know what you think down in the comments. What should I do to get that fixed? Should I do a complete exhaust, or should I just go a little cheaper route and just get those catalytic converters replaced? Let me know what you think. I'm so grateful for all of you for watching, and I can't wait to show you what I've got coming up. I'll see you in the next one.